can't get into normal romances. Tony has to write all of those. Where's the
I
danger?
write monstrous stuff too.
No, it's...
Hey everyone, this is Let's Play, where we cover the intersection of books and video games. Today we welcome Abby Howard and Howard-Arias to discuss the writing and art for the visual novel role-playing game Scarlet Hollow. Welcome back. It's good to see you both again, and congrats on being our first returning guest to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great to be back.
Why don't we start with Scarlet Hollow's origins? What can you tell us about the original idea for the game's story and where that came from, and if there were any specific inspirations that you both drew from?
So it kind of came from this conversation we had of, well, if we made a game, what would it look like? So over the course of about an hour, we wound up, it went from 0 to 100 of just an idea for basically an interconnected anthology of kind of dating vignettes. And then that turned into, well, what if they were even more interconnected to the point that it was just one big story that had a lot of parts to it and also some dating sim elements.
Yeah, like so many stories that eventually go out into the world, it got its start from sort of shooting the shit at a bar with some friends, playing around with an idea that felt, fun but cheesy, which is what if there was a dating sim and then you keep going on dates and they keep turning into horror stories and going. We realized that neither of us really knew what we were doing for the next stage of our careers.
I had just finished up The Crossroads at Midnight, and I was working on pitching something else, but a lot of the graphic novel scene winds up being middle grade work, and I really was not interested in writing middle grade work.
It seemed like an interesting idea to pursue. Then COVID happened, so we had way too much time on our hands and just focused on making things. I think like within an hour from when we decided that, we'll do this, it moved away from like kind of more disjointed anthology to what's an overarching plot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And more of like a dating simulator to something where you can romance characters, but it's more like romancing characters in Baldur's Gate or something.
Because we work with visual novels, like it's very easy for audiences to assume that the fact that there are romance components means that we're making dating sims. But I think going off of like Abby's connection to like, it's more like Baldur's Gate, I've always viewed it more as it's like a BioWare game without combat, so focusing heavily on branching narrative, and romance is there as a component to like heighten parts of the narrative and is a new angle to explore for some players, but it's not necessary and it's not the central focal point of the story.
That leads to my next question here too. I've been really excited to ask this, given I think I reviewed episode 1 back in 2021. Abby, I remember you emailing you back then to review that episode. Now that we're 4 years out from that and we have a relaunch that just happened recently, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned through creating the game over the years?
Gosh, I mean, a lot of it is kind of adapting to the writing style of kind of working in this wildly branching narrative of just figuring out how to make every scene feel like it matters and feel like the player themselves have chosen to be present there, instead of kind of, we'll always have to make sure that characters, the player character is present for certain events, but we want to make it feel like people are choosing that somehow. So figuring out that balancing act, that was a lot of why we went back and did the Roads Untraveled update to episode 1, is kind of like making sure that it lives up to this level of writing that we have in later episodes. So yeah, it's been a lot to figure out, but
Yeah, that kind of leads into my next question, because you mentioned the big update that you recently released. Can you elaborate a little bit more on like why you decided to do that, and what specifically were the kinds of things that you wanted to like go in and change?
Episode 1 was the first video game either of us had developed, so we've learned a lot of lessons since then, and I think we both had the frustration of the first 2 episodes feel like or felt like the weakest parts of the game, especially with episode 1, like not allowing players the level of agency and control that the other episodes allow them. So like we wanted to put our best foot forward, since that is people's like first interaction with the game itself. You had
it was that.
Yeah, it was that. It was that. And it's like we wanted to get the beginning of the game to a place where the current versions of ourselves could feel proud about it, instead of like kind of being like, oh well, just hold on until episode 3, okay? I promise it really picks up them, and the first 2 episodes they're fine.
But they were very hard for us to go back through and play. Every time we did, it would be every 2 sentences we'd say, can we edit this?
Yeah, can we cut this? Why can't I do this?
The wording here is a little weird, just like constant edits, which when we did a recent like playthrough while still working on episode 5, we didn't have that for episodes 3 and 4. So it wasn't just that we're highly critical, but it was that there were things that needed to be fixed. So.
And really, like, we barely had that with 2. Like, I think... there's a similar thing in TV where most great shows have middling pilots compared to the heights they reach later on, because you're finding the show's voice. You're figuring out who the characters are. You haven't, like, built up the dynamics that in future episodes you're able to say, okay, well, these characters have this complicated relationship and dynamic, and like we can do a bunch of good dramatic writing or play a bunch of good jokes out of it. You're still figuring out who they are. And the joy with games, especially something like Scarlet Hollow, which is not voice acted, is you can go back and make those changes, even if you lose a bit of sanity along the way. I know with this update, it was 70,000 new words, most of which were at the beginning of the game, which meant that it took us kind of weeks to get everything else to the right place flow-wise, where it's like, did we catch every cascading consequence of new decisions? Did
we accidentally take out a load-bearing wall somewhere and now have to call it a special contract?
There was a big one where the episode 1 branching was fine, but the episode 2 branching, which was, sometimes players are frustrating and they want to exert their agency by not participating in your plot.
They're like, it's scary. Why would I?
My character would never go back into town. They would just sit here quietly for the rest of the week.
Until the week is over. And it's like, well, we're not writing that. So how do we make sure that this, like, you still feel like you can make the character choice of, I don't want to do this, without not doing it. Does that sentence make sense?
No, it makes sense. So there was like a challenge with that where we didn't realize that there was like a load-bearing, slow introduction to who Reese is in the first 2 episodes on the default path.
And he's pretty important. Yeah. Later episodes.
So if you miss like some of the introductions, going to his house can feel like a non sequitur. In episode 3, so we went back and added like another scene fleshing that out, and
there were some that I actually wrote that didn't make it in because it started to get to the point where it was like, oh, this is writing entirely different everything's. Like, it was a lot of work, but at the end of it, we just realized we couldn't put them in because it was just adding in yet more that we would have to change. So it's a balancing act of figuring out where those lines are and trying your best not to just like cross them for the sake of it, of saying, oh, but wouldn't it be so immersive if this happened? So...
And eventually the game needs to get done.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't have to be perfect. We can keep editing forever. Because this is, as somebody who worked in webcomics especially, this is a dangerous kind of trap to fall into, of the first 20 pages or so of your graphic novel, perhaps the first 50 pages are not going to be the same as the rest of the book. It's not going to be perfect. By the end of it, you're going to realize you're drawing a character completely different. And the writing style is like more refined, but the more you go back and edit, the more then you'll look at the future chapters and be like, well, this one isn't quite perfect, is it? So it's a famous trap that some people fall into. Did we fall into it here? No, definitely not. We took it just far enough.
Yeah, we spent pretty limited time on this.
I'd say it
was like a couple months. It was a couple months. Yeah.
And I'm very happy with it, so that's good.
Kind of on that note too, you touched on it a bit, like player reaction. The Black Tabby Games Discord channel is so active. I'm in it too.
Oh, thank
you.
you.
Just seeing all the theories and reactions. what has fandom meant to you, and how has it influenced the way that you approach writing the game? And even these choices like doing the relaunch and kind of editing some of the previous episodes. And, a lot of people have their really long running theories about what's going on. I'm just curious how that impacts the way that you develop the game.
We try and remove ourselves from that. I would say, like, for player feedback that actively informs development choices, we do collect surveys after every content release for Scarlet Hollow. So the biggest angle is just looking at, like, what's the split for a given decision, right? So in episode one of Scarlet Hollow has been out for 4 years. If you're listening to this podcast, you've played it or you don't care about spoilers, right? There's a big decision that, like, boils down to saving a dog or saving a guy, and huge, like, overwhelming percentage of players, like, saves the dog.
Big bias towards dog.
Big bias towards dog. So it's like, okay, well, if we're adding additional paths or branches to episode one, is there an angle we can take to make the man more compelling? There's that angle, and then it's like, I read the Steam forums, unfortunately, and I think there's an art to reading the things that people say they wish they could do and actually being able to read between the lines and figure out what's actually going on, because I think most players don't have the level of introspection or the level of, like, design or writing centered language to know exactly what a fix is. But you can see when, a trend arises, and it's like there is a big one of, like, episode one felt very railroady. This was something that came up a lot, so that was part of the changes we introduced with this patch. And ultimately episode one is still railroady in that you go through similar major story beats, same with every other chapter, but you go through those beats now in a way that feels like it's more reactive towards your agency than just the game being like, well, you have to go here now with this person in this context. So there's a lot more flexibility with, like, how you build your character.
Yeah, it's basically we take in feedback and we try to understand whether or not we are being effective in what we want to do. So if we're getting a lot of feedback that's basically, one decision is weighted in one direction or another, then we are not doing what we set out to do, which is to try to make difficult decisions for people. So
I remember there was this one interesting thing, because you mentioned fan theories too, and kind of curiosity and how that weighs on the writing process, where it was like one of our alpha testers reported, I guess as a bug or issue, that there was, like, a line of dialogue in the new update that felt to them like it confirmed a fan theory and maybe we shouldn't do that. And it was one of these things that was just like, or you all, like,
you're picking up
made
on
a fan theory about something that's just, like, kind of explicitly in the text already, and this is just information, like, being presented earlier.
Yeah, so I think kind of people knowing that we do accept feedback means that they think we are shifting the narrative and are like, oh, I like this idea, how about we just, like, throw them a bone, and are like, haha, this fan theory, when in fact it is our writing that is leading them to the theory in the first place.
So it's like this one was, like, I guess something people on the server call stickiness theory, which is that the town makes it hard for people to leave. And it's like, prior to this update, many characters have pretty much explicitly said something along those lines. And then we added one line of dialogue for a trait that also kind of explicitly says something along these lines. So it's just like, I don't know. The text is the text. I think a lot of the challenge and fun puzzle of writing Scarlet Hollow is understanding also that, like, there are so many ways to progress through the story. So, like, how do we add in redundancies for pieces of information such that on a given playthrough the narrative feels complete and everything feels, like, kind of adequately discussed.
Yeah. Very interesting challenge when it came to episode 2, because you can skip an entire library sequence, where you learn a lot about the town. So then we had to basically just say, okay, well, what are the actual important things that you learn in the library? What are the things that are vital to how the rest of the
Everything you
goes?
learn in the library is important,
Yeah.
but it's like, what are the immediate vital things?
Or
And
it's not
then
going to make any sense.
if you're not picking up other information, what are ways that we can give you bones or threads to pull at for other parts of the story if you go on this different route?
Yeah, writing a mystery is already hard. And then what if people purposefully can avoid learning anything about the mystery as
Right.
they go? So.
Or, they choose the order that they do things. I think that's just like a pretty standard part of like mystery-driven game design. I can point to like Blueprints as a recent release where there is so much redundancy for different puzzles to the point where it's like, sometimes in that one, you'll solve like a big overarching meta puzzle and all it gives you is information that you've probably already pieced together for a different puzzle earlier in the game. But it's like, well, if you were pulling on this other thread,
You wouldn't have
this is a fallback way to get that information.
Nice. Yeah, I've been playing Blueprints too.
Who hasn't?
Yeah. It's the dart puzzle that always annoys me.
Oh my
It's
god.
the
They
math
keep
one.
adding stuff.
Another one I'm excited to ask about, shifting more towards like a book publishing perspective. I'm a big horror guy. It does seem like horror is experiencing a bit of another boom right now. It just seems like horror is really in its limelight, particularly with monster romance books. That's kind of like a big thing right now for us.
So I've heard.
And Scarlet Hollow seems to lean into that a bit, and it seemed to lean into that pretty early on before this boom happened. I mean, you have that with Wayne and Reese. I'm curious, did you notice that? Did you notice the spike of interest there? And is that something that felt serendipitous, or did you kind of prophesize that there was a niche for this kind of like monster romance element?
I think that niche has always been there.
It always has. I'm writing for
Nice.
myself. I'm making this for me. Because I think part of it is just kind of like leaning into what I want to create means that somebody else is going to connect with it. This is kind of a big kind of design principle for work that I do, of just like, well, if I'm interested enough to write it, and if it's stuck in my head, it's going to get stuck in somebody else's head. So, and I also just always loved that kind of thing. Can't get into normal romances. Tony has to write all of those. And just like two people who are human. Well, where's the
I
danger?
write monstrous stuff too.
No,
I had the woman who eats you romance route in the other game.
Yeah, but I lean on you because you can also write the other kind.
Yeah, and I mean, I think like a lot of it is, what are the avenues available to us to explore the themes of the narrative in different ways, right? Like every romance option in Scarlet Hollow is roughly tackling the major themes of the story. Themes of family, themes of identity and relationship to history and the present and other people. And extending that to the creature feature side of things really just gives us more tools to work with. I've always really liked horror because it is such a metaphorically rich genre. So you can take these very big, bold swings with like a romance. And again, be like, well, so what happens if this person eats you? As an expression of these themes. What if this person really pushes boundaries? What if you have a creepy rotting stalker following you around? What does that mean in relation to the story?
And I think with someone like Reese in particular, of just kind of very much identifying with being afraid to share parts of yourself that others don't find acceptable, and hoping that perhaps someone will, that you won't have to just like tuck those parts away and pretend that they don't exist to try to make everyone like you. Instead, it can just be okay for one person to say it's all right for you to be this way, even though he is not the best, but
I also feel like some of the most effective writing isn't one-to-one with the real world.
Yeah.
It's something that takes similar themes but presents them in a completely different way that forces you to consider these things from a fresh perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot with Reese in particular where that comes into play of just, I don't see his story as just kind of this is really happening in front of you right now, but it's more just like exploring the themes of what this means to someone else, of just them seeing what they have done or other people seeing what they have done as equivalent to what he winds up doing. So just kind of like putting yourself in the shoes then of somebody who doesn't just think that it's okay for him to be the way he is, of just like presenting it in a way where it's clearly not acceptable in society for him to be the way that he is. And then to say, well, what if you just accepted him anyway? So
yeah, I think there is also a thing where we put a lot of painstaking effort into the decisions and situations in our texts where there isn't ever an explicitly right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
I think that the best literary works aren't didactic. They are something that just gives someone, in a way, like a kind of unsolvable puzzle, and tells them, work this out on your own, figure out who you are in respect and relation to this puzzle, and then walk away from it with what you will.
Yeah, I love writing characters where they have flaws that are difficult to overcome. And I think it's really important
and
to be able to write that.
This is a thing that I feel video games in particular really struggle with, from a writing and narrative perspective, where like almost everything has a good resolution. And when everything has like a clearly best resolution, there's this thing where like the texts almost become morally instructive.
It's like, well, we all know that this is the best one. It gets you the best rewards. It makes everyone happy. So there is a best outcome to every situation, when in fact, in real life, there is often
There
not.
usually isn't.
Usually every good thing you do, like, there is something else that you pay for down the line.
And there's usually like, different points of view and perspectives that are unresolvably at odds with each other. Mm-hmm. And it's a worthwhile intellectual and empathetic endeavor to try and approach, absorb, and understand those perspectives.
You kind of touched on something that I've been curious about lately I love choice-based games. And something that I've been reckoning with is how creators kind of define for the player, like, and you touched on this bit, but like, what is like the right choice, like even like morally right choice? And I guess that's probably a big responsibility as the creator of a choice-based game like this. Is that something before you really fleshed out the game and developed that you were trying to decide, like, and you kind of touched on this bit, but you're not trying to make the right choice. But, I'm just curious how you feel about that. I'd like that creator to player relationship and creating a choice-based game and kind of trying to your point, get off that guardrail of trying to define what the right choice is.
For me, I think one of the most frustrating experiences I've had as a player of games, and I'm allowed to do this because this is a beloved and successful title that I also love, Dragon Age Origins, like, you have a lot of these like really interestingly constructed conflicts, moral conflicts where you are pushed to take a side. And in almost every single one of them, there is a cop-out option. The one that I always lean on is like the situation in Redcliffe where there's like a boy possessed by a demon because his parents were like refusing to send him to the prison they lock up mages in, and you're ultimately like given a choice of you can either kill him or, use his mother as a blood sacrifice to exorcise the demon. And it's just like, what is the right or wrong thing to do here? You arrive at this situation by a bunch of different people making terrible decisions for themselves and others in a way that's like untangleable. And you hit that wall, and then the game is like, oh, but you could also go to a third location and get a guy, and he'll come in and he'll do the ritual that exorcises it without killing anyone. And it's like, you almost think, given that you would have to travel for this, and that like the child is very dangerous, that if you take this time, there would be an unintended like third consequence of someone else gets hurt. But the game just lets you do that. And then it's like it presents you with this interesting scenario, and then it pulls its punch at the last minute. And as an extension, like I would wager that almost nobody like takes one of the morally complicated or challenging options there.
Because then it feels like your consequences are punishments versus consequences.
And then you learn nothing about yourself. You learn nothing about what your values are. And if you don't learn about that, like, you know, what is the game doing artistically for you?
Yeah, because I've heard it gets perhaps a little heated sometimes, the conversations in our Discord server. But people really care, and they really have to think through why they're defending the decision that they made. And I really like having given people that, of just like, it feels like a success to have been able to give them something where they can argue one side or another. And I think another angle of this is also just character interactions in general, of just if everyone winds up being happy, if you're always making sure that everyone is like on the right path, that you are doing right by everyone, it makes for characters that are unmemorable, characters that don't have conflict, that like there isn't something for you to grab onto there, at least not for me. I know that like some people will probably disagree. They more look for something that is safe and comfortable in their fiction. But for me, I really like when there is conflict between characters, when things are stressful, when it feels like things could dissolve at any second. So I think Digimon Survive is an example I use a lot because I don't actually play a lot of video games, but I did play Digimon Survive because I really like Digimon, and I wound up trying to do right by everyone, and I didn't like any of the characters. Like, there's a couple of moments where like something stressful happens, like it's kind of built into the game, but I wish I had seen that for every single character. I wanted to see all of them kind of driven to a point where they were the worst version of themselves, so that then if they got better, if they managed to overcome this conflict within themselves, then that is I can understand that person in a way that I don't understand someone who's just like, I'm having a good time because things are going okay. So that's how I feel about writing. I like to be able to push characters to their worst selves so that their best selves really feels like something.
Yeah, you had mentioned all the different romance options in the game, and one of the things I really like about Scarlet Hollow is there is such a nice variety of very striking character designs and personalities in the game. I'm curious, what was the process that you both use for coming up with the characters, both in terms of their look and how they're written? Is there like a very specific order or method that you do to do that?
I don't think so.
No, I mean,
there
have been like a couple romance options that we added in later stages once like a character was seen as very popular. Dr. Kelly is the big one I can point to.
And like kind of then deciding, I think Dr. Kelly is probably the only one where we decided after the fact that she could be a romance option. Because we did come up with a way that it could be an interesting one. Because I think that's also something we definitely want to do, especially going forward, is making sure that every romance option is one where we understand like the appeal of it, of just why you were interested in this. And then that means that we can play with the dynamic in a way that's like interesting for us.
Did you have any favorite characters to either write for or draw?
Tons. I mean, Wayne and Reese, of course. I also really love Kanika and Tabitha. It's just most of them.
Yeah, Tabitha's the best one.
Tabitha's the best one. She's so easy too. I just like write something and I'm like, that's such a mean thing to say. It's great, perfect. It's like the meanest thing I could think of that she could say.
But there's an honesty in meanness, right? And I think that there's an authenticity that people find deeply, deeply compelling.
I mean, she's fan favorite for a reason,
right?
I think, so.
Like going back to Dragon Age Origins, there's a reason that Morrigan is such a popular character, and it's because she very authentically expresses herself at all times, and that also means that she often gives voice to things that people wish didn't remain unexpressed.
And I think people see Tabitha in particular as a challenge. And I think that that's a big thing for them, of just like, she is conflicted and she invited me here. She has opened a door to me. How do I take advantage of this to make her life better? So that's really nice.
Yeah, when I did my second playthrough on hardcore mode, I was just dead set on being BFFs with Tabitha, like no matter what the cost. There's just something so funny too about like how I feel like she kind of like slides in like unexpectedly with her like posture whenever you're like not expecting her, or if you're doing something you're not supposed to, and it's always like kind of mildly terrifying. It's pretty funny.
Oh, thank you.
Do you have any book recommendations for folks who enjoy Scarlet Hollow?
Grady Hendrix's books, I think.
Nice.
Yeah. How to Sell
I
a
can see
Haunted
that.
House, is that the name of it?
Yeah.
I think so,
That-
yes. Yeah. I think that would be a good pick for people. It has kind of the generational thing going on too, so.
Nice. It kind of strikes that, like, his books tend to strike that good balance of, like, horror and comedy, too, so I can see that for sure.
Mhm.
I'll say The Exorcist.
Nice.
Book stronger than the movie very good, but I think there is a particular way that book deals with like crises of faith and grappling with supernatural or maybe not supernatural burdens that comes across very, very strongly.
And follow up to, is there any graphic novels or comic books for people who really enjoy the visual style?
The
Charlotte Hollow?
Crossroads at Midnight. My book.
Nice.
I think I've read a lot of them. I'm just going through my mental Rolodex. I got nothing. That's it.
All good.
I don't know, probably read some Junji Ito. Like Uzumaki's a good one
That
in
is,
terms
yeah.
of like,
Trapped in
here's
a
an
Town.
anthology about a town that is slowly descending into madness, that has stories that are both great in isolation, but also weave together into part of a larger whole.
So if your listeners have somehow missed out on Junji Ito, now's your sign.
So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm just curious, since obviously Scarlet Hollow, player freedom is such a huge part of the experience, do you have any kind of guardrails for how you write the protagonist so that there are some core characteristics regardless of like what path the player decides to kind of go down?
Only in terms of backstory. And there is like something that's been very helpful where like the deeper you get into the game, the more it's pretty obvious that your character is supernaturally compelled towards certain routes.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why when we did like the big expansion, we were able to focus on the first 2 episodes as like,
The
you
place
know,
where we need
giving
to make
agency
sure.
for trying to avoid the narrative, because from 3 onward, like there is a little bit of a growing compulsion. I don't think that this confirms any theories, or I think the text is very explicit about this.
It says you are compelled.
Yeah, it
So
says
we
you are
said that.
compelled.
Yeah. But yes, basically the player character has to be a little bit of a loser, a little bit lost, unhappy with their lives. That's kind of vital. We've had some people say, can we have a nice backstory? What if there's one where you're actually happy? And I'm like, no, it doesn't work. You gotta be sad.
And I'm
And you also have to be a little younger than Tabitha.
I'm so sorry, but you have to be Tabitha's blood relation.
Yeah. It's kind of important.
I know I've seen a couple posts from people who like, you know, they've headcanoned their character as adopted or something, and they're like, why won't the game let me express this? And it's like, because you are blood relations, it's important to the story, and like, you know, there is a major theme analyzing like what it means to be tied to people you don't know and will never meet by that physical connection, by that physical thread.
Yeah, one thing I hear from people a little bit is, not much, but just a little bit, is desire to be able to separate themselves from kind of the history of their family, of like, well, I shouldn't be responsible for this. And that's something we're playing with. Like, that is something that is actually really vital to the very core of the story. I think episode 3 like examines that really thoroughly, and we are not saying one thing or another about that. It's that we are just exploring what it's like to have relatives who have benefited from like such horrible things, to know that you are related to people who have been so awful, so consistently ruined people's lives. Like, what is that like? Are you responsible? Do you feel responsible? Like, should you just be able to separate yourself? Some
Right.
people will never be able to accept that, though. If you just choose to separate yourself, some people are still never going to be able to accept that you are related to the people who hurt them.
Exactly, right? There's already a separation in the text where it's like, there is practically, like for the episode 3 stuff, there is no real material culpability for your character. You haven't like benefited from the wealth your ancestors have generated. You don't know any of the people or the town in question. You grew up, you know, raised by a floundering single mother outside entirely. So it's just like, yeah, that's the thing that like is supposed to be frustrating about the dynamic of the choice there, where like, yep, you're not connected to this except for this one thing. What do you feel about that?
Do you choose instead to turn to Tabitha and say it should be you,
or do you turn to her and say, yeah, like, fuck this, right? This isn't about us. And this is another one of those ways where it's just like, there isn't a right answer to that dilemma.
Yeah.
But
there aren't right answers to a lot of really complicated things.
And that isn't a one-to-one thing with actual reality, but it is like thematically casting something that occurs in reality in a different light, allowing you the freedom and flexibility to detach yourself from your preconceived notions and attachments and think about something from a different angle.
I'm curious, for people who are either unfamiliar or hesitant to get into visual novels, what would you say is interesting about them? And do you have any recommendations for visual novels that actually might be good entry points for players that are looking to get into it?
Well, if you haven't played Slay the Princess, that's like 3 hours long.
Yeah,
it's fully voice acted. God, what do you think, Abby?
I don't play video games.
Like, talking about visual novels as a whole is challenging because, like, it covers such a wide range of things, right? It's almost like asking, you know, for someone who's never picked up a book before, like, what could you say about reading? Do you have suggestions of book?
Yeah, because I think it's a storytelling style. Like, it's a storytelling medium, not like an actual kind of style. So basically, look for something you feel interested in and just know that it's going to be reading.
Right. Because, like, ultimately, not only are there genre differences, but there's mechanical differences. And there's ways where it's like, you know, when does something cease to be a visual novel? A lot of visual novels have little mini games in them,
and a lot of people who really like visual novels, like read almost exclusively visual novels, don't like ours because we've like taken out a few of the options that they're used to so that we can like tell our story in the way that we wanted to.
Abby's subtweeting people who are mad that we've removed rollback from our games.
Yeah,
that is a Ren'Py built-in feature where you can scroll down on your mouse wheel and rewind to like before a decision or something. And we care a lot about people committing to their actions.
Yeah.
But like, you know, ultimately, like on the gameplay side of things, like, is Disco Elysium a visual novel? You move a guy around on a screen, so that tells me no. But practically all of the gameplay is reading like, you know, 2 Infinite Jests worth of dialogue and making choices, and there isn't like a real-time application of skill. There's some resource management, but it's just one of those things where it's like the line is very blurry. So I think I usually like to talk more about narrative games in general as a broad stroke, because then I can point to like, well, this collection of themes in this game is like related to this game, where like, you know, if you're asking if you enjoyed Scarlet Hollow or Slay the Princess, what are like other narrative games you'd recommend? I think my list would be mostly things that people would argue aren't visual novels.
Like the What Remains of Edith Finch.
What Remains of Edith Finch, one, yeah. Soma, The Stanley Parable, Disco Elysium again.
Yeah.
It's tough. And like there's this other toughness too, where like visual novels have such a specific shape in public perception that makes talking about them difficult. Our games are visual novels, and I like the medium a lot. I think it's a very effective way to drill all the way down to just the narrative juice. But, there is a thing where like the early introductions of visual novels to Western audiences were dating sims, which is like a specific genre of good game. But then it's like some people assume that when you say visual novel at all, it means dating sim.
Yeah. And then, of course, if we have dating components and people are like, well, there it is.
Yeah.
I knew it.
But also, like, dating sims are good. I like dating sims. I like romance in video games. It's just a thing where it's like talking about our games as visual novels, a difficult way to get people interested in them. But just talking about broad strokes narratives and letting them exist as their own entities has been a lot more effective.
I know we're almost at time, so I just want to ask any hints or anything you can provide about episode 5. I'm eagerly waiting. I have been eagerly waiting for 2 years.
Thank you. Oh man, I'm sorry it's taking so long, but it means we're in a good place now. Anyway, you will be in Scarlet Hollow again. There you go.
Wayne will be present in the episode. To whatever fans I've seen speculate that Reese does not really show up again meaningfully in the story, Reese will be present in some capacity in episode 5.
I like him too much. If anything, I've written more than he needed.
Stella will be there. Avery, Tabitha,
all your faves.
Oscar.
None of them mysteriously vanished overnight.
Awesome. I think that's a nice place to end it.
Great.
Thank you so much for chatting with us. Yes, I'm very, very excited for the next episode as well. And yeah, everyone should definitely check out Scarlet Hollow.